Okay, just to let you know, this meeting is being recorded. It's for us, and it's also for other folks to learn what we're doing, and so that folks can know how to mobilize and organize. Welcome to Stop LAPD Spying Gender and Sexuality meeting. Every week is dedicated to a different thing. This week is gender and sexuality. We look at the intersections between gender and sexuality and the surveillance state. Let's see, just to let y'all know, we are not trying to police anyone. We have ownership of who gets to say what, because usually we get Zoom bombed. I'm a facilitator and so is Mariela. She's the other beautiful facilitator here. And we are also the panelists. I'll introduce the panelists. We have three of our panelists here. But I just want us to, realize what space we are in, realize what's been going on with specifically trans and queer folks, especially targeting trans youth and access to like healthcare and access to certain things. We're also going to be talking about Pride. It is Pride Month. Yay! And the history of Pride is that it's been policed. Yeah, so Mariela, do you have anything to say?
Thank you, Chela. Good to be here, and thank you everybody who is present. Happy to share this space together. And I'm just trying to stay away from a cat right here in the house because I have allergies. I'm visiting my family's home, but happy to be here, y'all.
Okay,
I'll pass it back.
Thank you, Mariela. Sorry about that. I just want to let y'all know, for some reason, my alarm keeps chirping. So if you hear a beep, don't be alarmed. It's just my alarm. Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and introduce Hannah Howard, who's been one of the people I've known for about 9 years now. She was one of the founders of Gender Justice LA, which was an organization in LA that helps to educate and advocate for trans folks and specifically trans women of color. She's also done amazing. She's also one of the folks that I can lean on when I do takeovers. Welcome, Hannah Howard.
Hey everyone, how are you?
Yes.
Is there a prompt, or are you introducing all the panelists?
Yeah, just introducing folks. And the other person I'm going to introduce is La Byron. La Byron is someone that works with Queerpocalypse, the things I do. They also have a queer art, queer trans art event that's like every 3 months. It's called Tamanza. There's also somebody that I've been organizing with to, shake shit up and challenge the patriarchy and white supremacy, y'all. I'm a little tired. Welcome, Byron.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Chela, for having me here and, helping us, focus around queerness and, shit that's important, even if it's Pride. So thank you for having us.
And y'all have just met Mariela, but she's also a part of a group called Familia, which they do a lot around deportation, especially around our trans and queer undocumented folks. Yeah, so she's gonna be talking a lot about that today. Yeah, so the first thing to everybody is, for folks that don't know, Pride has been really policed, especially in LA. What has been the pushback that y'all have seen, especially that you have been doing, Hannah and Byron, to push back on how co-opted Pride has been? Take it away, Hannah and Byron.
Byron, you want to go first? Or you want me to start?
You can, either one.
I can go first, I guess. Hi, everyone. So I've grew up in LA and I've worked in different community projects and organizing spaces for a while now. Um, so I think, yeah, just looking at the way that we look at pride and everything being like so corporate or just so like mainstream, and the way that we just, for the sake of things being convenient or things feeling accessible, right? And then what causes are all these things happening, and then just looking at like one of the history of pride, but also just the continuous violence that different communities continue to face, right? That are outside of like the very mainstream or very packageable LGBT community, right? So whether that is like Black trans women or just like any trans women of color in general, or like immigrants at the border, or just different communities, right, where folks are continuing to be displaced and marginalized. And then just looking at that relationship, right? And then I feel like, because looking at the history of pride, at least for myself, and the work that different communities like Chela, like Trans Latina Coalition, like all these different folks that have continued to do, right, in celebrating queerness, is creating that resistance and using these moments to not just radicalize ourselves, but push our communities to be, to discuss like state violence, discuss state policing, discuss all these different ways that, yeah, let's build towards queer liberation, but let's not do it in this way that, compromises or gives more power to the state or more access to the state of who we are and how we live our lives and our bodies. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just add on. Uh, since I've been living out as trans in LA since 2003, and even going all the way that far back in the movement, the LGBT movement had long since become kind of dominated by a class of white male middle upper class donors who were funding the movement, and as a result, like, I feel like pride and other things in the movement were continually, we're in there sort of like a never-ending process of depoliticization, like and it's similar to, I don't know how many y'all like there's a moment, I think, in the feminist movement, I don't know exactly when, it's like 80s, 90s, when like, people are thinking about solutions to sexual violence. And there's a moment when particularly the leaders of the feminist movement, and particularly white feminists, turn towards, well, we solve sexual violence by going to the police, right? And the police will protect us. And similarly, I feel like the LGBT movement has had a similar approach, to the point where, pride is this sort of like ultra policed, depoliticized parade, if that, and is quite expensive, especially in LA. That's kind of a unique thing about LA. There are a lot of big city prides that are still free, but LA is like, they have you can be in the parade, but like to actually enter the like rest of pride, you have to pay a lot of money. And we've been, in the past few years, there's been a bunch of folks, Byron's been part of it, Chella's been a part of it, I've been a part of it, doing some sort of like pushback, and doing some protests at Pride. We did a protest in 2016, that was sort of protesting the sort of, that was the year that Pride was talking about, they're like, well, maybe we aren't even LGBT anymore, maybe we're just like a music festival or something, and they had raised the prices and got rid of a free programming day. And meanwhile, it was a year in which, the number of trans women of color who had been murdered was, as big, it was kind of off the charts. And so we did this protest around, Pride being, we interrupted the parade and essentially got at the front of the parade, and tried to bring the focus back to the reality of like, of particularly trans women of color being murdered, and also being, held within ICE and murdered by ICE. We, in doing that, we faced quite a bit of violence. And I know one reason brought me on here was because like the police kind of like roughed me up at that protest. And like I'm kind of tired of telling that story, only because like, I'm like, as a white middle upper class queer person, I have like, more, I don't am not the main target of police violence against queer people, but nevertheless, it is interesting to me that some of the worst experiences I've had of police violence personally have been in and around Pride. That includes like, the festival, which is like, walled off with this, really intense security checkpoint. And then, in the last year, with the dialogue around Black Lives Matter, there's a little bit more of a conversation, and there was a lot of controversy last year because Pride tried to essentially co-opt the Black Lives Matter movement by having like a Black LGBT protest that they didn't really work with or coordinate with any of the with BLMLA or any of the real folks who are doing work on this issue. We interrupted that as well. And again, there's definitely a pretty intense negative response from some folks to the idea of like folks reminding them what Pride is about. And we definitely faced a lot of pushback. It is really interesting right now. There is a dialogue going on, and I don't know if y'all are following it, but NYC Pride did kick the cops out and has faced a lot of resistance on that front. There was like an editorial in the New York Times, like by the whole editorial board, essentially saying you guys are doing the wrong thing by kicking the cops out, which they did because they were in conversation with the queer community who was asking them to do that. So anyway, it's sort of like an ongoing struggle, and it seems worth talking about, particularly and Pride Month. So that's what I got.
Thank you, Hannah. And so like I wanted to also give a little context to last year's. In a nutshell, I got hit up by some folks and they were like, hey, Chella, have you heard about what's going on? Apparently, Christopher Street West, which is the corporation that hosts Pride every year, they, some of their members were like, hey, we want to do, we want to honor Black Lives Matter, we want to, and there was just no way of them doing it without co-opting it. And so this group kind of split and became all Black Lives Matter. And they were not, what's the word I'm looking for? They were not clear, right? They weren't clear in whether or not they were gonna allow cops. They weren't clear in why did they thank certain council members, Mitchell Farrell. They weren't clear in, a lot of things, right? And then they also did the horrible thing of thanking Mitchell Farrell the same day as Pride, when he pretty much got rid of houseless folks in Hollywood. So we did a takeover. Me and my band. For those that don't know, I'm in a punk band. And then I snapped. My bandmates listened, and we, it's not like that at all. They actually believe it too. We all went and took over the space. We were there for a good few hours, and it was still corporate. They were like, imagine at first, where you hear "fuck the police" from us, and us, and you see the freaking on the rooftop. There's pigs. You see the helicopters. You see everything that's about surveillance and violence towards Black and brown bodies, right? And then it's whoa, and then they come, the corporate people come, the all Black Lives Matter people come. All the piggies go away, the helicopters go away. And then you hear when we leave and we're just chilling on the grass, you hear the deep house techno music and white boys dancing, gay white boys dancing, Black Lives Matter on a fucking trolley. That if you got on the trolley, it cost you $20. Still corporate, So So just to let you know, that was the context. We took it over for about a good hour and a half. I had two other people that I wanted to perform, but things didn't happen the way I wanted to. I will say Stop LPD Spying was there as well. Well, Stop LPD Spying is always there. I'm there, so I'm part of that, but other members were there too. And there was a bunch of other folks that like partnered up with me. But yeah, do you have anything to say, Mariela, about like the history or the story of pride and policing and or pride and detention centers?
Sure. Thank you for the space, and thanks, Hannah, Byron, and Chela for sharing. I'm listening and echoing you all too. And what you're sharing brings things up for me as well. I have never attended a Pride in LA. I've been conscious of the cops and the corporations and all of that, so it hasn't been a place to participate. If I were to go, I would have joined you. If I could have, I just had a baby around the time you all disrupted. I had Janelli at the time, so it was nice to hear you retell that story. And so, yeah, I mean, it is, pride is rooted in resistance, and it got co-opted, as many things get co-opted, and in the occupied US, things, they want to profit from things. I just went to a Target, and that was what was in the entrance, all this rainbow flag, like outfits for doggies and stuff. And I was like, wow, it felt icky to me. And it makes me think of the state of Israel too, and what we call pink washing, and just the illusion and the appearance that there's solidarity with a marginalized group, but it's just an illusion. So in this month, our organization Familia also is disrupting the month by saying there's no pride in detention. There's a no hay orgullo en detención, and bringing attention to murder by the state within detention centers and incarceration of trans folks. And we actually just launched today a website where you could tune into the different actions. As we speak right now, one of the detention centers in Phoenix is being disrupted. And that's the way we're launching the month. And San Francisco has an action on Thursday, and lots of cities, lots of communities in large cities, in various cities, are taking action at detention centers or at a strategic location. So you could look at endtransdetention.org for more information, or Familia's page will be live streaming these actions. Familia Trans Queer Liberation Movement. But yeah, I appreciate the conversation. It's bringing up a lot of things, but it is a sickening thing to see how the true stories are erased, and there's this fake solidarity sort of thing that is done, but it's all for profit, and it's not really throwing down for liberation. So I'm with us in this conversation. Thank you.
I'm going to be completely transparent and talk about that. We at first had a different topic. Then I thought about it being pride, right? Like so I'm going to be completely honest and transparent about my experience. I've always like had some kind of hate towards police. I didn't know the history. Now I do, right? But like, and I've always identified as somewhere in the LGBT spectrum, and primarily G or T, just being real. And so I have gone to Pride. And I remember like the last time I went to Pride was when I started getting indoctrinated in anti-police movement work. And I was like, I remember going there and seeing like in the parade specifically, like the motorcycles of pigs, police, and just being like, oh my God, that sickens me, My question to everyone is, why are folks not aware of these things? Why are folks not aware of the history of like knowing that Marsha B. Johnson, not Marsha B. Johnson, but trans women of color and queer folks of color started Pride as a fucking riot against policing queerness, right? That's what the very first Pride was. It wasn't what it is now. Why do folks think, why do folks think that, why do folks not know the history? Why do folks not know the history? Coming out with the questions on the fly, being real. Anyone can take that.
I think maybe it's not people not knowing the history, is like what history has been created, and who has kind of scribed that history, and that's become this reality as well. So it's like colonization, and the history of, so exactly, it's a colonization of the mind, it's a colonization of our existence, and it's, just our whole being gets colonized by this altered or completely distorted history. So yeah.
What about you, Mariana, Hannah, or Byron? Do you have any answer for the question? Why do folks not know the real history? Why do folks, what makes folks blind to it,
And real quickly, shall I just open up unmuting so folks can unmute themselves?
Okay, thank you.
Aaron looks like he has something to say.
I mean, I would just say, just not looking even like as recent. I mean, like the 60s, 70s, not that long ago, right? But even at least like in LA history, right? Like the work, the different folks have worked to create, right? Particularly in my experience, transgender women of color, and then Latino women, because we live in a city where there's a lot of nature of the city. Anyway, just looking at that work, right? And then the spaces that were created. And like as things change, things progress or compensate, like people project different ideas of what they think they would like things to be, they become very like, kind of say like people were like, well, it's safer the police are here, right? Even if it isn't like, well, is it, right? Or like, who is it, it's safe for who is it safe for, right? And then just the way that we put value in people's like labor and time and contributions, whether that is for like LGBT movement or like for queer liberation. And like in the work that like in looking at Pride, like for example, like this year, right? Like all that money, right? Like all those floats, all those things, all these nonprofits, all these like corporations, all these businesses, right? Like because they want to appease their employees, they want to have like a certain image so they can make more money, right? Like all that money has already been like allocated for like Pride celebrations, right? And like that's not happening this year. So all that money was already allocated. Where's that money going to go to, right? And before it was going to all these organizations, entities to like give money to the police, right? To be there to provide surveillance, to provide a sense of safety for a very limited number of individuals, right? So we're looking at the work that we do and our lived experiences. It's about pushing back and the idea of what that looks like. And I don't know if you can hear me well. Hopefully that.
Mariela or Hannah, and then we'll open up to other folks.
Thank you for the question. It's like many other truths. The state does not want us to know the truth. The truth would steer up things to help dismantle the state. And so it's a truth that if they keep it hidden, to erase black femmes, to erase black trans folks who are powerful and had to stand up against the state, to stand up for our lives, to stand up for their lives. And that's not the story that the state wants us to know. And the state is the schools that we grow up in. We don't get to hear these stories unless we have some teachers who are disrupting the curriculum. So it's hard to access the truth if we're just following the program. The truth is there, and the truth, wants to be known, and we have spaces like this to tell it. But it's not designed for us to know. We have to seek it or find it. And, you know, and I feel like when you know the truth or you know these stories, we have a duty to share it and continue the disruption that can help with the dismantling of these violent systems. And I think I wanted to share something too. Thank you.
Before you share, Hannah, I just want to let you know the other person I have invited to talk. She's here. Her name's Sarah. I've known Sarah for the last 5 years. They're an amazing activist and organizer in San Diego. She's been here in the last year. You may have seen her before. She was doing a lot of movement work, especially around bringing the name up of Tony McDade in Black Lives Matters, protests in the streets. And she's an amazing activist and friend. Welcome, Sarah, y'all. Sarah, you there? Sarah Evans. Okay, going once, going twice. So, okay, it's your turn, Hannah.
Oh, it looks like Sarah's back, maybe?
Oh, wait, yeah. Sarah, you're muted.
Can y'all hear me now?
Yes. We can hear you now.
Okay.
Welcome.
Just welcome.
Thank you for having me. My head was, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Okay, so we're talking about the history of pride and policing and why is it so. My question to everyone right now was, why don't folks know? Hamid, what you said was really good about the dominant narrative, and then what Byron said was really well spoken, and then what Mariela said was really well spoken, and then we got Hannah. You didn't say nothing. Your turn.
Sure. Okay. Sarah, did you want to, because you didn't really get a chance to answer the first question around just like your own experience and work with policing pride, but I can also, if you want to, either before or after, whichever. I just want to make sure I give you a chance.
You want me to say my experiences with policing?
And pride, yeah.
Oh, and pride. Well, that's a lot. Thanks for starting off so easy, y'all. Well, I think when we talk about pride in general as trans folks and as Black folks, this notion of pride is a new concept. The whole notion of pride is a new concept in the human kind of thought process, but the notion of being not necessarily proud of oneself, but being intentional and being involved has always existed amongst LGBT people. And so the issue that I always find myself encountering with pride, the organization, is too much pride, right? And that's one of the things that has been my experience specifically with pride, is that there's so much pride that we can't see the damage that's being done to Black people at the hands of police officers. We have so much pride that we can't see the abuse and neglect coming from our own communities, right? And so what I've always said is too much pride. And then when my experience with policing, my experience with policing has much to do with my experience with psychiatry and being a disabled Black trans woman. And so, the times that I have, was homeless, lived in a shelter, was discriminated against for being trans, was the psych ward again, and being hauled away like a criminal. And I think, how many more people does this have to be their reality for us to take it seriously, that nobody should have to, come from being a suicidal place and then against their will have to go to a psych ward because this is what a judge or this is what a police officer said, right? And so I think that in my experience, Pride, when we deal with organizations like Pride, what is Pride doing with their funds? What is with the endorsing of Israel, right? What is with the endorsing of Israel? What is with the endorsing of what is with the endorsing of DAPL, right? And the lifting up of Wells Fargo, right? The lifting up of capitalism, the lifting up of laughing at young people, at youth, right? So one of my very deep experiences with both Pride and with the center and with COPS is our youth here in San Diego, probably about 3 or 4 years ago now, kind of rose up and said that they didn't want to have COPS at Pride. So this is the youth that go to the center, that go to the youth center, that, you know, that attend groups. And what happened at the kind of meeting, which the kids decided to make their statement that they did not want COPS to be at Pride. This was at an event called Trans Day of Empowerment here. And these children were booed. These youth were booed by grown-ass people who go to their jobs, who have this comfortability, who have the ability to move in the little gay village here with passability and a level of peace that our youth that are of color just don't have. That is a luxury for them. And so I was really offended. And so I wrote a speech because I was asked to speak at this Day of Empowerment. And from there, had every intention of not necessarily being anti-cop, but of being anti-psychiatry, of psychiatrists being in league with the police, right? That was really what my speech was going to be about. And I was told that I wasn't going to be allowed to speak if that's what I was going to talk about, right? But mind you, this is what the youth want to hear, right? And so it's crazy because I still ended up speaking, but I didn't speak about that particular issue. And what ended up happening was the kids got booed. Our youth here were booed for that. And so my experiences when I think about Pride and when I think about centers and I think about places that are in league with COPS, it's just all around wounding. Traumatizing is not the right word, it's wounding, right? Because it's like something that doesn't heal easily and can be reopened over and over and over again. And so that's what I think about when I think about my trauma as a Black trans woman. And I think about, what young people who are Black and trans are dealing with. They're dealing with people who have money, who have power, who have respect, and telling them to be silent, as if silence is the answer to their liberation, to their struggle, as if silence is going to help them to reach liberation. So that's my experience.
Thank you, Zaira. Thank you for sharing your experience. Hannah?
Yeah, there's so much in what Zaira just said, and it makes me think about this, that adds this question of like, why are these stories forgotten? And like, I was just thinking about, when you think about surveillance, not just being COPS, but also mental health institutions and the mental health system. Like, if you go back just 40 years, right? Like just homosexuality is in the book as a mental illness. And like, it was just sort of standard practice to lock up, LGBTQ people. And I think that when you think about why are these stories why is like the actual history forgotten, I think you can point to the fact that the LGBT community, for better or worse, is very stratified, right? Like there is a class of people who have a lot more power within the LGBT community, who have money, who have resources, who are white, and have white privilege. And those folks made a decision at some point that they were going to get theirs, and you look at the victory, like, what is seen as victories of the LGBTQ movement over the past decade, those are, I mean, it's good that I guess that that like can get married, but that's like a victory that was won with organized money, not organized people. Like, I mean, it was paid for by a donor class, and so yeah. So I just feel like that I don't know. Like I'm curious, like if comparative.
Can I bring up a component now that you just brought forth into my mind?
Sure, go for it.
So one of the issues that we faced as a community here in San Diego when we were thinking about police and policing, and we were thinking about violence, was the reality that they made that year, Black Lives Matter had exploded that particular year. This was 2015. And that year, the trans community, Laverne Cox was on the cover of Time magazine, right? We had all these things in the trans community going on for us. And so what the Center and Pride decided to do was they decided to make all of San Diego's trans community the grand marshal for the Pride Parade, right? So it was this whole kind of capitalization of trans youth, of Black experiences, intersectional struggle. It was this kind of capitalization of intersectional struggle. And I was like, oh my God, this is totally the psychological plantation. And I'm sorry if this gets academic, but this is totally the psychological plantation of white supremacist imperialism. I'm like, why are we organizing money and not organizing people? When did our movements become about organizing money? This is the problem that Marsha P. Johnson addressed, right? These are the issues to me when we look at the activism of the Stonewall of Miss Major, right? This is the things that she tries to pull us away from. Is money matters. It's a tool, but money can never come before community and people, right? And so when I think about the struggle of what we have to deal with, kids being children and youth being silenced, but money being prioritized, right? And so that is what I want to speak to that you brought forth, is you brought that memory out of my brain. They made the entire trans community the grand marshal of the parade, as if to kind of, usher us in to power. And I felt like, what a symbol, what a miseducation, what an injustice, right? But,
Go ahead.
I just want to add two things to that. And about the money is there's consequences to relying on money. And I don't know how many folks are aware, but since gay marriage passed, money has flowed out of the movement because the people who are donating are fine. And now there's like all these bills everywhere that are trying to, criminalize being a trans youth and trying to make life basically a living hell for trans youth. And the money is not there because that's not what those folks care about. The one other thing that I want to say, just to call, I don't know what the effect is, but just to call attention to this, because I don't know how much folks are aware, but one other factor and why the movement is co-opted, I think, is there is a generation of like LGBTQ activists who just were wiped out by a pandemic. And, like there are like, when you think about the AIDS epidemic, like, that disproportionately affected some of the most radical activists. And like, I don't know what the effect is on the movement long-term, but it's worth factoring in, because I don't know how much folks recognize how much that was like a whole generation just gone.
So somebody answered the question as well in the chat. Andrew Lewis said, who gets to tell the story? Narratives. And then Brother Pancake says, hold on, let me get to it. Institutional exclusion and ignorance, not wanting to recognize the history of LGBTQ community. One love, Pancake. Thank you. Those are very, very real things. Hannah, you did mention that's so real, especially like knowing that like HIV and AIDS primarily was, it was affected, when it came out, it was affecting everybody in the LGBT community. But folks that were not being able to get like healthcare were primarily Black and brown, right? Black and undocumented folks as well. And so thinking around like access, right? I love when Cyra was talking about access to psychiatry, like people know my history with therapists and my history and the fact that I live in a housing that like gets funding from the government. It really does. Like my housing gets funding from the government. So like my therapy is from the government, So it's gonna do what it's going to reinforce what the government wants to reinforce. It just will. You can find people that are like little plants in them, but primarily they're just going to reinforce it. Anyway, another question for us all to think about and ponder is what would a real movement of pride look like without police?
I think that Black trans folks should be answering that question, and not because it's our responsibility or because it's our role, but because it is Black trans women that started Pride, right? Right. It is important to remember that. We always say it, but there's still not a true recognition of the realities of what Pride is. And that is that Black trans women said that we will not let a police officer tell me who I can fuck. I will not allow a police officer to tell me what I can wear. I will not allow a police officer to tell me where I can live. That is what Pride was about Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia and Miss Major saying, you won't tell me who I can fuck, what I can wear, where I can live at, where I can have a drink, right? And these are the realities that I hear, when I go in the few times that I go into community to be around other brown folks and to be around other Black folks, they say, I'm not going to Hillcrest unless it's something big, because the pandemic is over. Okay, I do want to go now. But on the day-to-day, I don't want to go there. They just did a street sweeping of homeless folk. Why would I feel safe, right? These are the realities of being Black and trans in our spaces that are supposed to be for gay people, for trans people, by gay, by queer, by lesbian, by trans folks, right? And so the reality that you end up facing is instead of it being a riot, instead of it being a real movement of saying, you will not monopolize our resources in our communities, what it ends up being about is, oh, well, how can we make ourselves useful so that others will give us money, right? What can we do in service of imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy so we can be involved, right? And so for myself, I think that was what scared me, was now Pride had become, it was obvious that now Pride needed to be about how do we get money in people's hands, but in a way that is capitalistic, in a way that is profiting cores and is profiting all these people, but not community. So what it would look like is a riot.
Yeah.
What it would look like is a riot.
Oh shit, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you, Ami. So I'm gonna actually step back from this question and go back to the last question, because we had two people who had their hands up. Andrew, do you want to say something? I think I said what you were gonna say, but if you want to say something, unmute yourself and go ahead.
You had said it, and I'm shy.
Oh, sorry.
No, all good. It was what I wrote to you.
And Shakir in the house. Go ahead.
Yo, yeah, no, others said what I was gonna say too, just thinking about that question of the history. And I mean, everyone already said it, but it's deliberate, it's because like radical histories, especially of all our movements are always kind of rewritten to help like the system kind of, especially thinking about all these companies, arms manufacturers, Goldman Sachs, everybody using it, they're getting a benefit from it. They're able to extract and capitalize kind of some really limited like idea of what's progress, or they're able to use it to brand themselves and to like sell their products, or like Mariella was saying, to pinkwash their violence and extraction and harm. But so it's just that point that it's deliberate, but I think others ended up saying it. Thanks, Shaw.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Hamid, I was going to, but then I forgot to go back to y'all. So getting back to this question, I'm going to answer it as well. Sorry, you said something that made me think about not just Pride in general, but like who has access to be, who has access, and I mean, that can mean anything, time, money, everything. Who has access to be holding space and contributing to space, right? Like I think, just being honest, like when I first came out as trans, I was going to the LGBT Center for their trans meeting. And it was predominantly white cis gay men that were holding these meetings, or white cis gay women that were holding these, like, and I'm like, I would be like, why are we here? You know, like, why do we start our own shit? You know what I mean? Like, and then like, I don't know, I haven't been there. Like, I remember the last time I went there was like 2015, 14, something like that. And it still did the same thing. It like, I was like, and then I did ask a friend like 4 years ago, did they change? And they're like, yeah, there's been a trans white woman that's been holding space. That's better than nothing, but they could do way better, right? It just makes me think of like who owns time. I mean, who has time to do shit, who has access to be able to do shit, and why, right? Like, why is it that these folks were able to do it in the first place, instead of like it being like, you know, like sometimes like I recognize for me like how I hang out with friends, it's super organic, right? And most of my friends that I hang out with are POC or queer and trans, right? And then we talk about this shit, you know, my band, like it boggles my mind. I'm like in a band with trans, you know, trans and queer folks. I didn't have to like, oh sorry, sorry, I didn't mean to ask you to mute. Unmute. You're good? Okay, good. But yeah, I think about access. That's my point. Anyone else? Byron?
About what pride will look, what? Repeat the question.
What does pride look without cops? Without the police?
I mean, I think going back to talking about history, like at least for me, what I've been thinking about lately has been around like letting all these like moments radicalize you, kind of like what Sarah was talking about, like just literally saying like, you can't police my being, right? Like if other people, right, policing gives them a sense of safety, right? Like there's some individuals who are always gonna say like, that doesn't bring any safety or comfort for me or for my community, right? So letting those moments radicalize them as opposed to like letting them buy into these like into capitalism or to these very like systems of blending in. So looking at that now, right, like letting these moments, because the work that I see from people, like as Chella mentioned, right, like yeah, regardless of all these institutions, right, and all these people who are invested in making money, right, like the people who are actually doing work, whether that is doing the work to dismantle state surveillance, looking at work to resist police violence, or you know, like, or helping out like other immigrant communities, right, folks that are here who are trans, who are queer. So the work that is happening, right, and that's needed happening is led by these people, right, who choose to live outside of these like constructs of what society tells us to do. So for me, I would say that's what it will look like, you know, for us to being able to like use these moments to radicalize us, right? And looking at things like very simple, like, you know, which echo with the work that Sarah is saying and folks are facing in San Diego and all the cities around the US, right? And just like constant surveillance and like rampant capitalism, right? Where like people like Mitch O'Farrell get to be like, oh, I am an LGBT like city council member, right? Like somehow that makes them untouchable or makes it very like palatable to these very like liberal individuals, right? And again, right, like that's cool that gives folks a sense of like safety and comfort and like, you know, that somehow they're not gonna lose whatever little they manage to accrue. But that doesn't mean it's accessible or safe for other individuals.
Yes.
That's really what I've been thinking about.
Mariela or Hannah?
And I lost you, sorry.
Yeah, when you first asked it, I just imagined it in action. It looks like organizing on the streets. It doesn't look like you're marching with the police. It looks like what it originally had to be. As Syra was uplifting and naming Sylvia and Marsha P. Johnson. They have to defend their lives and their communities' lives. And that's what I picture a current example. I'm thinking about trans and queer folks in Colombia who are visibly creating art, marching, doing, putting their bodies on the line in front of the police, who are murdering their people, murdering folks out there. So, and that's what I think of. That's what pride looks like. Janelli is here, folks. I'm trying to tone it down so she could go back to sleep. But hey, yeah, that's my instinct. Is just it's an action against the cops, not with the cops.
Really quick, I saw this amazing video of I think it was in Colombia, of trans and queer folks voguing at the police. And the police were getting aggro, and they were still voguing. And I was like, that's the kind of ball I want to go, just being honest. But Hannah, do you have anything to say?
I to be honest, I was looking at Twitter today and I saw those pride things from Raytheon and Goldman Sachs. My reaction was just oh God, I just wish pride were over. Which, it's kind of, I realize it's a very privileged reaction because I know a lot of people still need it for, I don't know, some kind of sense of visibility or belonging, but I was just fuck, I'd rather this wasn't happening at all at this point, for me, the biggest thing is just that it's not just about the ceremony, it's about the redistribution of power, because I love that. I've just been thinking about this because I love this right now. There's a show, or there's two shows on TV, right, that have heavy representation from Black trans folks. There's Pose and there's Legendary, right? And they're a lot of folks in front of the camera, and you think, oh my God, representation, how great, but the money, the actual power in how those shows are being produced. And this isn't to say that it's all about those media institutions, but this is true in almost all places, is the visibility is there, but the money is going somewhere else. That Legendary show, it's wonderful, but it's made by the two guys who made Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, and they're the executive producers, and they're the ones who are reaping the profits, and it's not going to the performers. So anyway, I just would like to see a long-term redistribution, and I don't really care if we have an event, at this point.
Thank you. Sarah, can you say what you just wrote? That's amazing.
So once again, to shift our focus back to the radicals and revolutionaries who began our movements as blood ran in the gutters, right? They were fighting, they were literally going blow for blow with people who have guns and people who had batons, right? And nightsticks. And Marsha P. Johnson said, and Sylvia both said, the revolution is here. The revolution has finally come, right? And so I feel in my interpretation of that quote and reading that piece of history, I understood that to mean that the revolution has come. That was it, when our revolution became visible, right? When people could see that we weren't to be fucked with, right? And so that means that our movement has to keep going. It doesn't mean that Stonewall was just the birth of the movement and it stopped there. It means that it's here and it has to keep going. And so that's what I also want to give, is to challenge folks who are here, is what are you doing every day in service of the revolution outside of whatever job it is that you feel like you are doing, whatever ways you feel like, because I didn't get on this live or this stream and really tell my story, because I spoke about my experiences about being hauled off to the psych ward, right? But the other really painful experiences that have come with our history being co-opted, right, has been what our youth have had to face. So when they tell you they want to hear a Black trans woman talk about being thrown in the psych ward, then in service of that revolution, that's what they want to hear. That's what needs to be spoken about, right? So these are the things that we need to be doing. Every single day, we need to be doing something in service Black trans women's revolution, right? And if you're not, then you are in fact complicit, right? And so we have to, that quote, the revolution is here. You should be thinking that every single day. When you're at work, when you're getting out of your car, when you're pumping your gas, the revolution is here in this moment now, right? So.
Yes, yes, Ira, I agree. I just want to acknowledge some things too, right? Hold on. Yes. Can you say that, Mariana? Can you go ahead and say what you're gonna say, and I'll say what I was gonna say.
I was just giving some information in the chat, some context for the voguing in the streets, and the organization is called La Red Comunitaria Trans Community Network. They're in Colombia, and the hashtag is Todo Posungo. Todos los policías son una gonorrea. All cops are a gonorrhea, and they were coming up with their own cultural context and phrase similar to ACAB, but in their context. And the other phrase no es una no solo una manzana, es todo el árbol. It's not just a rotten apple, but it's the whole tree. I just wanted to share a little bit about that as I'm laying down listening.
Todos los policías son una gonorrhea.
Yeah.
Me encanta. I love that. I love it. God, that's lit. Yeah, y'all. I mean, like something about one of our phrases that I really like when we say Hamid, is building power, not paranoia, right? Like when you think of surveillance, oh my God, y'all. Like I was watching Trevor Noah, and they're like talking about like how with Apple phones, you have to opt into getting surveilled now, but we all know they're still using our phones to surveil us. If you have a smartphone, they're using it. You have something with a Wi-Fi, they are listening. You know, we cannot be fooling ourselves. But yeah, I just wanted to name that. Okay, I think I do want to encourage folks to like say what do they think Pride would look like without cops, you know? I do ask that if you're, you know, queer or trans identified, you speak up first. If you are not, step back for a minute and let other folks speak. What does Pride look like without the police? Anyone can go. I'm gonna pick on someone if nobody says something in 10 seconds. 9, 8. Okay, Shakir, where you at? Shakir, are you still with us? Oh, are you serious? Okay, fine. Jamie, what do you think Pride looks like without police?
Hi, everyone. Thank you I've just jumped on. And can folks hear me okay?
We can hear you
folks
loud.
hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So, yeah, so, you know, I think just kind of jumping into this, I'm on my way home, but something that I'm an intersexed woman. So I think one of the things that I think when we get police out of the conversation, when we think about gender and sexuality, one thing that I've been really realizing in my identity as an intersexed woman is that, you know, gender is fluid and sex is fluid. And there is nothing about sex organs or the way we appear that like identifies a binary of male or female. And I feel like there's something about the liberalization of being gay or being lesbian that has created this other kind of category of deviance where, you know, in my experience of being intersexed and the kind of, you know, questions, like medical questions I'm asked and ways that I'm othered really comes from a perspective of people really wanting to reinforce that sexual organs determine a gender, or that your appearance determines what your sexual organs are. And I've become more and more like, and I think what's interesting, and Chella, you know, my friendship with you and growing with you in some ways really helped me to kind of like not come to terms, but really re-experience my intersex identity, and in a way where it had been so long pathologized. And even to this day, you know, and I get kind of exhausted speaking about, you know, or being referred to as being abnormal, you know, all the time in my, you know, OB-GYN visits and stuff. And it gets to a point where I'm just like, I don't want to like spend my time educating this person. Like, you're cool enough that I don't feel scared with you. I don't really want to exert my energy, like, you know, telling you to stop calling me abnormal. But like, I think if we were to get away from this liberalism, we could really get into realizing how like gender and sexuality is policed, and it's forced into this, you know, strong male, you know, loving woman who, you know, have these certain kinds of identities. And we could be like seen as just, you know, who we are and what we bring into the world. Because even, you know, now, and, you know, I identify as a woman, and, you know, to many people, you know, they assume like, you know, I'm a woman, but with those assumptions come like, why aren't you married? Where are your kids? And then there's an assumption that I'm not productive either because I don't have children. Like, you know, oftentimes because, you know, the last 10 years of my life have been really hardcore dedicated to organizing against LAPD and against policing. You know, and I'm a nurse, so in the hospitals, like when I would be exhausted, you know, going from organizing and dealing with like, you know, like death and all the tragedies that are happening in the hospital, they'd be like, well, why are you so tired? You know, you don't do anything, like you don't have kids. And so you realize that there's this expectation and there's this like assumption of like non-productivity because you're not embodying what their assumption of your identity means. And so I think if we could really almost even talk about that kind of policing and how that is reinforced, that we could get to the bottom of that there is no male or female, like, you know, biological makeup, you know, and that it's fluid, like sex and sex organs, and that development is absolutely fluid and has nothing to do with how I identify or how feminine or how masculine I feel. Because there's days when and I feel like just like, you know, this kind of like power, like intensity of like masculine energy like flowing through me, and there's days where I feel soft and just warm and like, and not that those are even should be identified as being male or female, but so it's really just you know, when I think about like queer liberation, I think about Black trans women, I just think about how much liberation and understanding has come to my identity and how important it is for me to be more vocal about being intersex, because I think it just fucking blows it off the roof about, you know, anybody attempting to identify your gender with a sex organ. And so like for me, like Without Police is intense intersex and trans solidarity, because there's so much that I have been able to just, I don't know, grow. And so I'm just, you know, that's my pride, you know, it's just that, you know, queer like folks will like liberate us all. And, you know, and that's what's interesting too, is just that there's this like, you know, other piece of like the intersex identity also disappeared. And where I feel like our identity is like so much key to like, you know, unlocking this like liberation for everybody, you know? And so I really feel like my pride is like intersex and trans solidarity and just so much love, you know, for that like pride I have in myself now, and that's just devoid of, you know, what people would call abnormal.
Thank you, Jamie. Shakir, welcome back.
Yo, yeah, sorry, I'm on the phone with car insurance over my car got hit. But yeah, I mean, like think about Pride Without Police. I mean, it's kind of a version of what people already said. Is it's like, I mean, it's not called Pride, but obviously it's the origins of it. Like, you know, this was always honoring resistance and rebellion, and like Sarah was saying, revolution. That's what Stonewall was, obviously. And so it's kind of so I think, and like Mariella's talking about Colombia, like it is these kinds of resistance is what it is. And I mean, what Jamie was now saying is kind of also making me think of, and going even back to like the co-optation and the history point, is like all of these kind of radical movements, what they do is they do, like Jamie said, you know, they liberate all people and say, and, you know, they have benefits for all people. But I think there's like a dark side to that, kind of obviously, of like others benefit from like the liberation that's won through the sacrifice and the revolutionary kind of struggle of radical movements. And then they would honor the revolutionary part, but they just benefit. So like there's a kind of extractive aspect of that. It liberates everyone too. And I think of that, for example, with just like, you know, like Black radical tradition and Black liberation stuff over the years. Everything that organizing those movements have won has benefited all people. You know, it's benefited, you know, migrants, it's benefited South Asians, it's benefited Muslims, like benefited so many of my identities. But like, has it gotten rid of anti-Blackness in the Muslim community, in the South Asian community? No. If anything, like those remain just as powerful, and like the suffering and struggle of Black people to liberate themselves and to, you know, more broadly have this benefit of liberating society kind of helps other people, while Black people still remain, you know, oppressed and discriminated against often by some of the same exact communities that are benefiting. And I think that there's both a parallel to that probably with queer liberation, obviously, is like there's been benefits for so many other communities, and there's also all the fucking benefits for Raytheon and all these companies that were like, that's that direct type of extracted benefit. But in the same way, it's not, because then the rebellious, radical, revolutionary resistance aspect of it is gone. That's why, you know, Black trans women continue to be so targeted and vulnerable. And like, even though that's who was you know, leading the fight, that we now have come to kind of commodify as pride. So yeah, just think about that. Like, yes, like the liberation of queer people and Black trans women or Black people or whatever does benefit everyone, but until we get there, it kind of is it's often an extractive relationship that happens through.
Thank you. I was just, okay, so to let y'all know what I was reading, these are a bunch of trans women of color, and I'm in this, and I just want to read what I said. It just happens to go along with what I feel right now. Where am I at? Give me 10 seconds. There we go. Shell. A world, not just a time, but a world where we don't have to fight for survival or mere crumbs. Like at the end of the liberation, like that's what real pride is to me. I don't think, to be honest, even in my very sexual nature, I don't think going to watch white gay go-go boys is pride to me. I think For me, like literally pride is literally like what I do on the daily. It's like when I get funds, distribute them to other trans women of color. When I'm out there with my band, like shaking shit up, that's pride. When like literally I'm giving out um, pepper spray and tasers to femmes, you know, that's pride. So yeah, that's pride to me. Um, I actually wanted, is Mariela still here? Mariela, um, you already talked about the actions that are coming up for the detention centers, right? Can you reiterate those? And then you're more than welcome. Because to be honest, I have to leave soon too. I have to leave in like 20 minutes, well less than that. But I have some announcements before we go. We can all say something and then
Yes, thank you,
we'll end it early.
Thank you, Chela, and everyone. Earlier, I was sharing there are actions throughout the month, this whole Pride Month, to disrupt and interrupt and to remind of its origins. There is an action happening right now in Phoenix. Maybe they're wrapping up at a detention center. This is an End Trans Detention month of actions. And Familia Trans Queer Liberation just launched a website where you can stay updated if you have access to the internet. It's endtransdetention.org. The actions will also be on Familia's website. Website as well, but also our social media. And it's a lot of different local organizations at each or individuals and groups at each city who are organizing it. Familia helping support the actions and organize them too. But there's a lot of orgs who I could lift up in each of those cities. And for now, I wanna, there's Trans Queer Pueblo in Phoenix and Mariposas Sin Fronteras and other folks out there. So I'm wishing them a lot of love and power. And the goal is to end trans detention, get all trans folks out of detention centers. It will be culminating in DC. I could plug that in right now. The last week of June, it's 25th, where there will be a procession with coffins being delivered to Department of Homeland Security for Victoria, Joanna, and Roxana, 3 trans migrant mujeres who died in ICE custody, who died because that's the way the system is designed to kill like that. So stay posted. If you're in one of the cities this Thursday, if you have folks in San Francisco, there's an action there. So that might be the most local to us. I believe there may be one in San Diego too. I know Saida's in San Diego. They're just popping up throughout the month. So yeah, keep an eye out for that. If you have folks in the various cities, it's like Philadelphia, New York, Chicago, Florida, different places are doing something this month, thankfully, to disrupt pride and remind us of what it's really about.
Thank you, Mariela.
Yeah, thank you, Chela, and everybody.
Sarah, do you want to say something in closing?
I think what I should just say in closing is, we do this for the reminder of Miss Major, for their legacy. We do this for the legacy of Marcia. We do this for the legacy of Sylvia. We do this for the legacy of all our sisters who we've lost to violence, to intimate partner violence. We do this to people who have been lost in ICE custody. We can never forget, and we can never really be fully repaid for our loss, right? And I think about myself, the deep pain I feel, thinking about Marcia going missing and then the police saying that she killed herself and our communities knowing better than that, right? That's what this is about, right? We do this for justice so that we know that Marcia can rest in peace, right? I think that we do this because, as Sylvia said, these white allies need to quiet the fuck down. We do it in that spirit, right? That they gave us. And I think that it's our task to be reminded of that legacy and of that awesome kind of experience and nuance of truth and of intentionality over intersectionality, being intentional in about liberation and how you pursue it.
Thank you, Sai.
And Bayron.
I was just gonna say, connecting with what everyone shared, looking at the kind of like what Syra was sharing about young people saying like, yeah, the police are not, doesn't make, like we have no property that they need to protect, so they don't make us feel safe, right? Or even like the work that folks are sharing around New York and like I know Philly and like other cities are trying to have that pushback, and like places like that in LA to exist, or even like saying like making the connection with like the police and like ICE, which I know like even that's not being like full on being taken on by like the immigration movement, because again, it's not like trans women, who are leading that movement, right? So it's kind of like how do you then push back and do all that? But anyway, that is all to say that Chella's gonna be doing a couple events this June, so like there'll be some local stuff here to support. Chella's going to be doing an event tomorrow, right? The whole month is Pride, but for Sex Workers Day with Swap for Hump Day, and then on the 13th we'll probably continue the work around but around whether or not there's a pride parade or a march, for us to be able to take over space and look and feel like we don't need to give permit money to the police, right? We don't need to validate their existence by in order for us to protest and gather. So we'll be able to take that over, so if folks are around, things like that. Even if it's something simple like someone needs your car, or someone needs you to be there for that day, things like that again help us radicalize and shift the work that we're doing, right? And whether that is the meaning of like what protest looks like, what pride looks like, or just even what like political works look like, right? In terms of looking at who are the power holders, right? And what is the work that is being done on the ground to push and shift people's narratives and perspectives. So thank you, Chella, for always, having us and creating the space and facilitate all this. That was really, really great. Thank you.
Hannah, is Hannah still here with us? Where'd she go?
I'm still here. Yeah, I don't know. The only thing I would say is I think I hope we can continue to think critically. I feel like one thing that I don't know about this group, but the movement in general needs to get clear on is that simply being LGBTQ is not inherently radical. I mean, I hate to say it, but there's like the history of being gay and conservative goes back almost as far as the history of being gay. And like, you can go to the 80s, like Roy Cohn was like out there treating Donald Trump. And yes, he was a queer person, but like he's a terrible person. And I feel like the more we can get clear on that, I think a lot of the time, I know that it's really hard, particularly for non-queer folks, to feel like they can talk about that stuff. But I mean, it's very real, and we have to be critical thinkers about what it means to be queer, what it means to be radical and queer, if we're gonna be able to do anything. So that's all I want to say. Yep.
Ditto to everything everybody said. Thank you, Syra. Thank you, Mariela. Thank you, Byron. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Shakir. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Brother Pancake, for saying things. And thank you, Hamid, for allowing us to have the space tonight. So yes, announcements next week, right? Talk about next week, or the next webinar.
Yes. So the next Tuesday, which will be the 8th of June, is our second Tuesday webinar, The War on Youth. So yeah, remember to dial in.
Sorry, y'all, I'm distracted by two babies. And yes, and Byron did mention it, June 13th, we are doing a Pride takeover again. Want more information, hit a girl up. Tomorrow is International Whores Day. We're uplifting sex workers of all types. And we SWAP, Sex Workers Outreach Project, one of our coalition members. We are, I have to start getting used to say that. We have a zine that is for sex workers by sex workers that is launching tomorrow, and it's culminating at 7. There is an Eventbrite, so if you want more information, my band is performing. Come on, anytime I can get my band to perform, it's lit. And there's gonna be some sexy dances and music. It's gonna be lit. So tomorrow at 7, if you want more information, hit the sister up. And I think that's it. That's all my announcements.
Sheila, where's the action tomorrow evening? Do we have a location?
It's online.
Oh, gotcha. Oh, I didn't hear that. Okay.
It's on Zoom. You asked that last time when I talked to you. You forgot.
Sorry for that.
Okay, it's gonna be online. So it's a Zoom event. Yeah.
Oh, that's
so,
right. Sorry.
I'll give you the Zoom. But yeah, don't forget to tip people because we are doing this with a fundraiser as well for sex workers. Hey. So yeah, the end. Any questions, comments, cares?
I just have one more announcement too. It's okay. I want to invite folks, if you are in Long Beach or can get to Long Beach on Sunday, a lot of families and folks are gathering to protest at the convention center where children are being held. And surely there are trans and queer children, LGBTIQ plus kids amongst the children who migrate, who are forced to migrate. So it's a really good example of what we're talking about. That space is so commercialized around. There's a mall across, there's like all this shopping happening. Meanwhile, there's kids detained there. So 10 a.m. at the Lagoon Park, right by the aquarium. We're gonna be gathering there and taking it to the convention center, 10 a.m. to 12. Thank you all.
Thank y'all for joining us. I promise next time I'll be more prepared. And I think this was a good conversation. I think it was.
Yeah. Thank
Love
you.
y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Byron. Thank you, JoJo, for the love. How you doing? Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Hannah, bye. Peace. Thanks.